One of the questions that I get asked on a regular basis, and it doesn't matter whether it's from football fans or whether it's from journalists, is players of Indian origin, or PIOs as they're called. Now, it's a contentious issue. First of all, those of you who don't know the situation with PIOs, let me just briefly explain. The Indian government does not allow someone who is not born in India to represent their country, and they don't allow someone who has to have dual citizenship, basically. So you can't have two passports. You can't be born in another country, keep that passport, and also as well have a passport of India as well. So that is the problem with the current rules and regulations for PIOs. Now, why is this important? Well, with regards to football, as everyone knows, India hover around 100 in terms of their ranking in the world, and obviously you want to put out the best possible 11 to take on all comers. That's the only way India are going to get to a World Cup. It's as simple as that. Now, Chai Tuesday. The thing is this, there's a huge debate over PIOs. Some people are all for it, some people are dead against it. Now here's the argument of those who are dead against it. The argument is that every player that was born outside the country to Indian origin parents, of course, but were not born in India, they are taking the place of a homegrown talent. Bollocks is my answer. As you can probably see, I am all for PIOs. Now, if you want to set up the legislation like this, then go for it. Now, what I mean by that is, if you want to bring PIOs into the Indian national team for a period of time, let's say 10 years, that allows the homegrown talent to come through the ranks so that a young kid that's currently 10, 11, 12 years old, a potential future talent, that when he hits 20 is a serious prospect for the national team, then that's fine. In a decade, you can reverse that policy and say, you know what? No PIOs can play for the Indian national team. Here's the thing. A lot of PIOs, and I'll mention a few names in just a second, a lot of PIOs, players of Indian origin, are at some of the best clubs in the world. They have had a footballing education that is second to none. Now, let me give you an example. Jamal Bhuiyan. Jamal Bhuiyan is the captain of the Bangladesh national team. Now, I don't know how many games you've seen of the Bangladesh national team, but certainly if you saw when India played Bangladesh, Jamal Bhuiyan is the best player in the Bangladeshi 11. Bar none. He's head and shoulders. Jamal was born and brought up in Denmark. Jamal was a youth player at FC Copenhagen. FC Copenhagen, for God's sake. FC Copenhagen have just been knocked out of the Europa League quarterfinals by Manchester United. What better football education than that? He's played at Brøndby as well. And he has now become the poster boy for Bangladeshi football. I've said for years, and those of you who've been watching me over the last 15 years, I have said for years to anybody who will listen, you cannot con the fans. You cannot put a player into the national setup which is simply not good enough on international level. Doesn't matter what position on the field. It doesn't matter. So Jamal Bhuiyan, now the poster boy of Bangladesh, there is a young kid right now, and I guarantee you this, there is a young kid right now in Bangladesh who wants to be Jamal. And that kid might only be 9, 10, 11 years old. But 10 years from now, that kid will dedicate his teenage years to being Jamal and to taking it everything up a level further. So like I said, I've got no problem with removing the PIO rule after a decade or so. I totally understand that, because surely, within the next 10 years, we will have progressed Indian football to such a point that everyone is homegrown. Everyone is born and brought up in India. That's the way it's going to go. Now, have a think about this. here's a few names that spring to my mind that I know about. There may be ones that I don't know about, but these are just the ones off the top of my head. Danny Batth plays for Stoke City. You have to be reasonably good to play for Stoke City. Can you imagine? In defence. Danny Batth in defence. India's struggling in many positions right across the pitch. But if you have that solidity at the back alongside Sandesh Jhingan, can you imagine that? Can you imagine what that would bring to the national team? Who else? Sarpreet Singh. Sarpreet Singh. How could I forget Sarpreet Singh? Now, Sarpreet Singh, he's not actually at Bayern Munich at the moment. He's on loan, but he's been signed up by Bayern Munich. Now, Sarpreet Singh was born and brought up in New Zealand, but he's been signed by Bayern Munich, man. Bayern Munich. One of the best football clubs in the world. You don't want... And what is Sarpreet Singh? Don't quote me on this, but I think Sarpreet Singh is, 21? Something like that. If ever there was potential, then there it is. There it is. But because of this stupid PIO rule, Sarpreet Singh cannot play for the Indian national team. Who else? Let me have a think. Harpreet Singh, the Norwegian. I met Harpreet Singh in Norway when I went over to visit Gurpreet Singh Sandhu. And Harpreet Singh, he's played for Feyenoord, for Vålerenga, if I'm not mistaken, Molde, which was the team that Odi Gulasanskar was manager of. He has a pretty good footballing background, midfielder, and you think that he would not lift the level of the Indian national team? Really? You don't know what you're talking about. And then there's others like Omid Singh. Omid Singh, Iranian background. Anyone who knows their football knows that the Iranian team is one of the best in Asia. In fact, they're constantly jostling with position, aren't they? For the top-ranked side in Asia in the AFC rankings. Sometimes they're first, sometimes they're second. But let's put it this way. They're right up there. So you're telling me that Omid Singh is good enough to play in Iran, but not good enough to play for the Indian national team? Nonsense. Total nonsense. So, the PIO rule. Get rid of it. Let's accelerate Indian football at a much faster pace than it's currently progressing at. And I'll tell you why this is important. And this is the final point I'm going to make on this. I'll tell you why it's important. Every single week, I read an interview, I listen to an interview, or I watch an interview of someone commenting that Indian football is progressing. They're absolutely right. It is progressing. Indian football is progressing. There's no doubt about that. But here's the thing. So are other teams in the world. So are other leagues in the world. So are other national teams around the world. They're also moving forward. And if the Indian national team is moving forward at the same pace as those other sides around the globe, you're not making any progress. Blech. So, Indian football has to move at twice the speed of other sides around the globe. It has to move at twice the speed of the progress of other teams that are in and around that 100 mark in the FIFA rankings. That's the only way India is going to qualify for a World Cup. PIOs, we need them. Make sure you, I don't know where to go, subscribe, like, comment. I definitely want to hear your comments. Definitely want to hear your comments on this. It's something that, it boils my blood.